I'm proud of you. They've never seen them accomplish anything. And we want to provide them by how we model behavior and prepare them for the future. We want those guys going out saying, you know what, I really appreciate it. I've done my time. I'm ready to get with it. I'm going to go ahead and ensure that I reestablish relationships if I have kids, whatever it may be, and then get back out in the workforce. And we are the primary facilitators, because when a person leaves, I don't want him going to the PL when he leaves, the probation officer. I want that person going to his job and then his housing that he secured near his job, so we can start moving forward.
I know that you've worked across the country in different regions, really, in Alabama, New York. What specific challenges have you faced here in Nevada that are different from those other parts?
I will share this with you. We have some very, very talented people here in Nevada. As a matter of fact, when you look at most of state government, all of us are underfunded. All of us struggle with trying to meet the needs of our organization, but we have very committed professionals. The difference here is we do a lot more with a lot less. It's unfortunate, but the reality of it is it works because it's all can do. Most of the professionals I deal with, whether they're in a police department or another corrections agency, sheriff's department, or people like Ventoria Gonzalez, they're deeply committed. They seek answers, they want to understand and know data, and they want to come up with solutions to try to change not just the current circumstances, but change society by trying to get things right, fair, and moving forward. And some of the other facilities, in some of the other states, I can honestly tell you not so much would probably be the best response. But here, I think it's different due to the commitment of the people, whether you're dealing with the state Supreme Court or the governor or the legislature. I've had very good conversations with these folks about moving forward and actually making change. And I'm very hopeful with the commitment that our staff have and all the other professionals I work with, that we're going to continue to make that transition, because in my opinion, we're working as a team.
Thank you. Now, the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, works directly with those who are incarcerated. They work in the courts and the legislators and in the communities. Attar Hasibullah, what kind of concerns do you hear from people in the community as it relates to the correctional system?
Thanks for the question, Shakala, and thank you to the Mob Museum for hosting us tonight. We hear a lot of concerns, so obviously my perspective is going to be widely different from that of Director Daniels, right? We receive letters on the daily from individuals who are incarcerated at the Nevada Department of Corrections, and the conditions that they say they're experiencing are abhorrent. They're conditions that nobody should ever be subjected to. In the next several months, we have litigation planned on a multitude of those issues. One of the biggest issues that we've seen, and I'm a practicing lawyer as well, I'm from Las Vegas, and so I have insight here for some decades, but some of the issues we experienced even recently, attorneys being unable to access their clients who are incarcerated within the Nevada Department of Corrections, depending on the facility. We haven't seen uniformity between sites. So if I talk to if I go and I talk to Gene, Conservation Camp, I might get a different answer for whether or not I'm able to visit a client than if I'm attempting to speak to somebody at High Desert, which means that the client that we might have, the individual who's suffering internally, might not have the ability to access us. That's a bigger issue. We're lawyers, right? We can force our way into situations when we need to. They can't. They don't have access to be able to do that. And the PLRA, which limited the ability to bring litigation, has posed increasing challenges there. But when we look at the overall nature and makeup for how our system of incarceration works, this isn't a knock specifically on NDOC, it's a failed system nationally. To Director Daniels' point, when we're going to ultimately release 95% of the overall population that's incarcerated, the programs that we put in place are, anecdotally, they sound great. I mean, it would sound like it's a summer retreat, but it's not. We see individuals who, through no fault of their own after they're already incarcerated, end up ill-prepared to be able to advance forward. The experiences that they have internally within those systems are even worse. And that's not even incorporating any of the elements that existed during COVID, right? We, at the ACLU, called for a significant number of compassionate releases to occur. That didn't happen. And what did we see? An infection rate 4 times higher than the average public within Nevada Department of Correction facilities. Individuals should have been released. When you have 39% of the prison population incarcerated for non-violent offenses, when women have increased within the Nevada Department of Corrections by a rate of 20% amongst that group, 20% between 2008 and 2018, the fastest growing demographic within prisons, who are continuing to be subjected to prison labor, who will file grievances internally, and an audit came out that 2/3 of the complaints raised with respect to excessive use of force weren't even investigated. It leaves them with limited options. So needless to say, we mostly get dissatisfied surveys. I have not received one that's complimentary. I'm hoping for the day that that happens, but I'll probably be out of work when that does happen. And I'm hoping that does change, right? But that's just not where we're at right now. I agree that we're in an underfunded, dramatically underfunded state for every program. What underfunded government's not called on to take care of, underfunded nonprofits like the ACLU are called on to handle. We don't receive state funding. So my team of 3 or 4 lawyers is responsible for going out and handling all of these issues. There's no right to an attorney there. So in effect, what you have is systems that continue to perpetuate the injustices that have occurred, and not necessarily attributing fault there, but when we don't have uniformity in being able to remedy those issues, it becomes increasingly problematic. And then we think that years down the road when those individuals are released, are we going to ultimately end up seeing something productive come from that? Or was it we were just holding people in boxes for a prolonged period of time because society did not want to deal with the underlying issues that led them there in the first place?
Going off of what Mr. Hasibula just said, so in several U.S. prisons, the conditions for both staff and inmates are often poor, overcrowding and understaffing. And according to news reports, 55 prisoners who contracted COVID-19 died in Nevada prisons. Mr. Daniels, can you comment on this? Was this preventable?
It's unknown as to whether or not it was preventable in terms of the actual spread of the virus. As you know, our inmates did not have it. It came in as it circulated around the globe and became a pandemic. However, we were one of the very first corrections agencies to, number one, start monitoring it, which was back in February of 2020. And in addition to that, we were one of the very first to implement procedures. We called it a firewall strategy, in which we stopped all we stopped all entry and exit until we could figure out exactly what to do. If you may recall, back then it was still called coronavirus. And you may also recall that even though it was called coronavirus, there weren't enough PPE, personal protective equipment, gloves, and so on. We started making it ourselves and supporting other agencies to assist them. We were ahead of the curve, and as a matter of fact, from the time we started monitoring all the way until we got to October, later on in the year, our numbers were extraordinarily low, and we were in the top 10% in the nation. However, once we had a pause, folks relaxed a little bit, went home, relaxed, addressed issues with their children and so on, which of course was normal. When our staff came back, then we started noticing the spread. We were also starting to get quite a few from other sheriff's departments and jails. The folks were coming in, the offenders were coming in infected. And so, although we had quarantine and isolation, this spread still went ahead and went further. But we treated everyone, we were able to isolate, we tested regularly to the extent to where we're testing at a minimum once a week, with staff in many respects, depending on the time we were testing, once or twice a week. And we had a lot of procedures. So, you're quoting a number, I believe 55, that's inaccurate. The number is actually 49, nonetheless 49, 55. I wish I could have prevented every single one of those. We gave an extraordinary amount of time and attention to establishing these various methods of moving inmates, keeping them in one place, isolating inmates. And when you look at the big picture, I thought we did a stellar job, but I'm the first to admit, could we have done better? I believe so. We're not perfect, but I think we gave it a yeoman's chance, a yeoman's fight. But I also want to just point this out. While everyone else went to Zooming and staying at home, my staff did not stay at home. Every single employee, whether they were a post-certified or not, every single one of my staff were designated as essential, and every single one of us came to work, and unless we actively had COVID ourselves. And I will tell you, I believe we were the only agency in which all of its employees had to come in, and we came in spite of the fact that we had families ourselves, we had kids in school, we had people lose loved ones. I lost my father and my mother-in-law. during COVID, and we continued to press on. We were called to stand for it, and I hope when everyone is looking at the penal system and looking at some of the problems, I want you to understand I'm fortunate enough to serve a group of heroes who never once wavered on the responsibility, in spite of the fact they were dealing with all the other issues all of the other people around the state and around the country did. So 49 was the final answer. Could we have done better? We are clearly not perfect, and there's some things I would do differently now, but I'll say we gave it one heck of a good run, and we're still fighting the fight.
Thank you. Well, mass incarceration has a wide range of consequences, socially, economically, and racially. Frank Cooper, let's bring you in here. In your research, what do you believe has caused the current issue that we are faced with today? And how has the era of punitive excess fueled mass incarceration?
Well, I also thank the Mob Museum, and I think that really there are three causes that are most important. So the first one is the economy, the second one is the politics of law and order, and the third one has to do with the Supreme Court's acquiescence to the politics of law and order. With respect to the economy, it's certainly important that when people are convicted and sentenced to jail, that there is a path out to a job. And we have in the United States, like in much of the West, since the late 1960s, really hollowed out the economy, right? So if you're a professional in the tech world, you're doing great, right? If you're an investor, you're doing great, right? The Dow keeps going up. But then what's left for most people is service jobs that are low wage and they're not protected by union protections or other protections. And so that means that a lot of people are vulnerable. We don't really have anymore a lot of, or at least the sort of extent of middle wage jobs that people can get without having a great deal of education that really allow them to live their lives in the way that is sort of the American dream. So that hollowing out is the first thing, right? That means that when people are sent back into the community, they don't have really jobs that are going to be available to them. And that's before we get into all the disabilities that we put on people who have been convicted and then served their time. Secondly, with respect to the politics of law and order, certainly since the Nixon presidency in the United States, there's been a move towards trying to deal with everything, and everything really means the expansion of equality in this country through civil rights. We try and deal with the fallout of that and the fallout of the economy by saying, let's get more police, let's put more people in jail, let's throw away the key. And that is not an answer that's going to help us. It does not actually make us safer, right? And it does not actually make the world a better place. So the politics of law and order, whether it be Nixon blaming civil rights demonstrators for crime in the country, or there was a spike in crime in the country in the 70s and 80s, that spike being dealt with by punishing low-level drug dealers, mostly in black and brown communities. Right? That meant that this was a racially targeted war on drugs that President Reagan started in 1982. And you may know that when President Reagan started that war on drugs in 1982, 2% of the country thought that drugs were a significant issue. But because of the demonization of people's addictions, the demonization of people who had hopelessness and responded with drugs, then we just kept ramping up and ramping up and ramping up to the point where we are the world's leader in incarceration by far, right? I would say that we are in the company of dictatorships like Russia and some of the other more authoritarian countries in the world, but we're not really in their company. We're way ahead of them. Right? We incarcerate so many more people per capita than any other country in the world, and the main reason for that was the politics of law and order and the war on drugs. And then the third part is that the US Supreme Court has really acquiesced to certain types of techniques that lead to the targeting of racial minority and poor people in this country for suspicion and for prosecution, conviction, and sentencing. So specifically, the Supreme Court has said that racial profiling is okay. Well, of course, if I'm a police officer and you tell me, here's a howitzer pointed at black and brown people, what do you think is going to happen? Right? The US Supreme Court got evidence that the police were racial profiling, and they said, we don't care. And that sent a message loud and clear how to enact these policies of law and order and the war on drugs. And I'll just end by saying that specifically, Justice Stevens of the Supreme Court accused his brethren and sisters on the court of having become loyal foot soldiers in the war on drugs. And I can talk more about what happened with that, what the impacts of that were, but simply the fact that we had an economy that hollowed out, the fact that we had a politics of law and order, and that the Supreme Court went along with that is why we have mass incarceration today.
Ms. Gonzalez, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have been thinking about what the data shows us and what it means. One of the things that's really important to me is making the data meaningful. And it doesn't take much in Nevada because the Department of Corrections puts out monthly fact sheets about the demographic makeup of their population. And it doesn't take much to look up that sheet and then Google the last census findings and see that the makeup of that does not match the demographic makeup of our state. The problem is, I can't tell you why. And that's what I'm working towards. I have that information, and any of us could look it up. I just don't know why. And hearing Frank talk helps me think about other things I can look into. I can tell you anecdotally what I was reflecting on, what I think is important to think about, and it made me think about when I was teaching. And I taught 7th grade English here in Las Vegas. And what I can tell you is I could see how even before we're talking about individuals who have entered the criminal justice system are being treated and just disciplined in an educational setting. And that tells me that we have work to do before they even get to the criminal justice system. And I could see students of color specifically being sent to the dean's office more often and then coming back to my classroom or another classroom and behaving a certain way because they had just been basically incarcerated, right, in the school system as it is. And then coming back to my classroom, and I could see how if I look at them differently, if I talk to them differently, if I discipline them differently, they reacted differently in the culture of my classroom. And that was my little experiment that I could do. I could see these same students, and they were, I mean, generally, and where I was teaching, they were mostly minority students. And maybe part of it is that we can see each other and we could relate on a level, but there was something happening in my classroom that was not happening in other classrooms. And I could see my students, all of a sudden they would disappear. And it wasn't because of an issue in my classroom, it was because of something in a different classroom. And I could almost identify which teacher it was that dealt with that issue, and they thought sometimes their only answer was dean's office, dean's office, dean's office. Instead of trying to understand the student, see the student, meet them where they're at, what needs aren't being met. I think that's absolutely analogous to what we're talking about when we talk about someone's needs as far as a job, a place to live, healthcare. And even in my classroom, did they have breakfast that day? What supports are they getting at home? And so I can tell you my experience is there's something happening there, and what that tells me too is what's going on in our community. And I can say what's happening here, down south, and just wherever you go, that wherever's going on in your community is a reflection. And so I think whatever we have to change the mentality of what's going to even get them into the criminal justice system in the first place, there's a lot of work to be done there. And the data that we're going to need, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. Because I can, like I said, I can tell you it doesn't line up. I just don't know why, and the reason I want to know why is because if I make a recommendation for a reform or for a change, it's got to get us the outcome that we're looking for. And we have to make sure we get focused on that and not just try something because we think that's going to solve the problem. If we don't really understand what the issue is, it's just going to keep happening and we're not going to actually fix it.
Now, we plan to address this more in our second public program, but I want to briefly discuss the root causes of mass incarceration, and we're already kind of touching upon it, but poverty and over-criminalization. And so, Mr. Cooper and Mr. Hasibula, perhaps this is a topic that you both can discuss, but some of the systemic issues that have contributed to mass incarceration.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. Let's just talk about the actual data and the facts. We have twice the number of people sitting in local jails than we do in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Those are individuals that are pending or facing trial. Why? Most often, it's for misdemeanor-related issues. Just this past year, we ended up engaging in a series of advocacy to make sure that traffic infractions were decriminalized. But when we over-criminalize every single thing, whether that's cannabis, whether that's traffic tickets, and organizations are left to deal, and individuals are left to deal with those consequences thereafter, we've effectively criminalized poverty as a society. This past year, the ACLU and other organizations came together in 2 different jurisdictions, and we quashed about 600 traffic warrants. About 600. I heard from a woman whose husband passed away during the pandemic that could not afford to pay the $300 traffic ticket that she had. And by the time fines and fees and genetic assessments and every collection, DNA sample collection, and every other fee was added, that traffic ticket spiraled upwards. A late fee, add a late fee, gets up to $1,000. She can no longer afford it. She's subjected to a warrant. So by the very virtue of the fact that we're still looking at many of the instances of what would be ordinary activity for someone who can afford it, but for someone who's impoverished won't be able to touch it, we can recognize how the system is. Right? I don't ever say the system's broken. The system's morally broken, maybe, but the system's doing exactly what it was intended to do. These laws have been on the books for years. And we talked about the school-to-prison pipeline issue. It's not a guess. That's a real thing. We look at the over-criminalization of certain schools. What does that end up doing? Look, I started my career, my first 3 years out of law school, I served as a juvenile prosecutor in New York City. New York City is the epicenter of street encounters with law enforcement. Las Vegas pales in comparison to the number of street encounters that exist there. And I can say that being from here, it's not a knock on Vegas, it's actually probably a good thing. But what we recognized was when you look at enforcement in certain areas, especially enforcement with certain categories of crime, low-level items, right? Jaywalking, criminalized as a misdemeanor offense, something that can create a basis for interaction with law enforcement. Why do we want that? Most of the police officers I've dealt with don't want that. And that's why I don't criticize police officers. I criticize the system of policing because it forces individuals to act in many of those situations. Otherwise, there's pressure. How many arrests did you get this month? What happens along those lines? There's pressure on these officers to be able to actually go out and get arrests. That is not a marker for a productive system that's focused on reform and making sure we're safe. Here's one of the things that's lost. How many folks that are listening today would believe me if I said that in 2021, violent crime was down in Clark County by a significant margin? That's a fact. That's what the Department of Public Safety reported. It was down by a couple thousand versus 2020, which was down a couple thousand versus 2017. If I told you rapes were down by 10%, would anyone believe me? Right? It'd be hard to believe because the dominant narrative that exists to push for politicization and sort of adjustments there ends up being we need more law and order. Things are broken. Things are worse than they've ever been. In fact, when you look at the statistics, that's not what it's actually showing. But statistics get lost when the dominant narrative becomes about how we need to be tougher, right? Being tougher on issues like the war on drugs has led to millions of people who have had contact with the criminal legal system for things related to cannabis. And we look at it 20 plus years later, and magically 30 years later, we've had a moral sort of awakening. And now we can make money on cannabis, and it funds our education system here in Nevada, and it does all these great things, and investors can make tons. And we recognize the other individuals who were left behind in this still have their records. They're still having difficulty being able to follow up. Just this week, we ended up filing a case to decertify marijuana as a Schedule I substance under Nevada law, which means if you're on Schedule I through the Board of Pharmacy, that means it has no medical value. Well, the Nevada Constitution said it did. So why are folks still being charged with possession of a Scheduled I substance for marijuana, which is in the same breath as heroin, meth, cocaine? when we recognize there's dispensaries here and investors making millions off it each year. So the system, again, to that same point, the system is working as it was designed to. It is morally broken, but that doesn't mean it's not doing what it was intended to do, because those processes have been going on for decades, and we're recognizing that more and more when we're starting to look at the issues that have existed with related to misdemeanors and the impact it's had not only on community, but on a fiscal basis as well, the amount of money that we're pouring into effectively correction systems to be able to handle this overflow of something that should have never been criminalized in the first place.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I have to tell you that I'd be glad to talk some about what the impact of mass incarceration and hyper-incarceration has been, but I don't know if you wanted to ask about that later.
You can talk about it now.
Okay, so I think when we think about, I sometimes call mass incarceration hyper-incarceration, because it's not really true that it's mass. It's not as though the police go off into the community at large and they just randomly pick 1 out of 10 people and put those people in jail, right? What happens is it's targeted at people who are based on race, usually black or brown folks. Often it's targeted at young men, right? And it's targeted usually at inner city communities, not so much our sort of ex-urban and rural communities. So part of the problem that this creates is that when, as the director says, people cannot go back out into the community and get jobs, it destroys the community, right? So why does this destroy the community? Because first of all, you are not able to, you lose your job, right? And it could be over a misdemeanor, right? You have an unexplained absence, right? Because you got picked up on, used to be jaywalking, right? Or, going 39 and a 35, which I just did on the way here, and which I do every day, usually by more than that. And I never get blinked at because I live up in Summerlin, right? But that's not what's happening on the east side and the west side of Las Vegas. The people are being pulled over for going a few miles over the speed limit when I get to drive down the Tropicana Speedway every morning. And I'm glad to say sometimes people are being picked up in these other areas. But the answer is not more of that, right? Because if you get a misdemeanor and then you are in jail, you may lose your job, right? So let's say that you actually go to jail and then you get prosecuted and convicted, right? Now you're in jail, you've got a work absence, which is going to be really hard to explain, and oh, by the way, we have legal discrimination against people who have been convicted because we allow employers to say, I don't want anybody who's ever been to jail. And that, to me, if you have an arrest, right, that alone can be a basis for discrimination by employers. So what does that mean? That means that we have less people in the community to work with their families, we have less people to bring in money to the community, and again, it's targeted, right? It's black and brown community, inner city communities for the most part. And those impacts then radiate out into the community. One other aspect of this that I'll talk about, because it's one of my main interests, is when law enforcement racial profiles, right? One of the things the Supreme Court has said is that you can use the fact that it's a high crime area as a factor for deciding to stop somebody. What is a high crime area? The court has never defined it. And so the police just pick and choose, and lo and behold, all of the east side and the west side are high crime areas. Near UNLV is a high crime area, right? Most of anywhere they want to stop anybody is a high crime area. And as a consequence, these communities that get labeled high crime areas, well, it's kind of hard to sell your house and make a profit off of it if you've been labeled a high crime area. So just the fact that we label areas high crime areas further impacts those communities.
Thank you. Several ideas have been proposed to reduce the number of people in American jails, and one of those ideas is to stop imprisoning people for lower level crimes like drug possession or petty theft. Now, this is, of course, a domino effect that begins with policing and then the district attorney's office, and then it falls on the correctional system. So, Mr. Daniels, what are your thoughts on this idea?
Well, let me explain it this way, but I'm going to take you a different route to get to the answer.
Sure.
I think part of what we do as professionals all of us, we have to model behavior. Those of us that are professionals can't turn a blind eye or say it doesn't matter to me or doesn't impact me. For instance, I'm a director of a correctional agency. When I got here, there was no one that looked like me on my executive team. My chief of staff is African American, so my deputies are African American. We have Asian, we have females, we have a ton of people, my wardens. And then the charge is, whenever you hear of anyone saying, how dare you work in this field of mass incarceration, I said, you better be happy I am. You better be glad I'm here, because I'm going to ensure that things are fair, equally distributed, opportunities for vocational training and education are equal and accessible to everyone. And I've been in systems where all the folks that had financial help jobs in the business office were of a certain color. All the workers doing heavy-duty yard work were a certain color. So part of it is just acknowledging that we have to be deliberate if we're part of the leadership in any area so that people can see you're making a difference. Secondly, if you are completely aware, and you're aware of the injustice of what's going on legally, then you have a voice. Do you know your legislators? Do you know the people that represent you? When you send people to the State House, typically a few meetings, a few letters, go meet with people. Because I do, as a private citizen, I'm participating in changing America. I'm participating in changing the system right now. And I can give you many pieces of evidence that would support that. And the thing is, yes, I'm okay, but many people like me are not okay. That just means I have more work to do. And that's how I want to respond to your question.
Well, this is, of course, a complex and dynamic issue. Ms. Gonzalez, how do you decide what kind of crimes deserve prison time? How do you decide which prisoners deserve a second chance?
That's the tough question. One of the things that's been interesting to evaluate is I like to look at what's happened in Nevada before. I think when we look at who's sitting in our prisons right now, that can tell us what was happening before that was worth criminalizing and locking them up and saying, you need to go sit. Things have changed. For a long time, I think we're focused on retribution. We're talking about being the war on drugs and being tough on crime. It was just about either retribution or just incapacitation. Let's just put them in a place where they can't do anything, and we're not working towards rehabilitation. And so one of the things that I think is we understand more about what's happening, that it's not just the behavior, what led to that. And it's understanding what's happening in our communities, or what is important to us, to what does public safety mean to us. That happens a lot when I have conversations with individuals as, if we're looking to change the penalty on something, and the concern is public safety. And my question is, what does that mean? And so there's a lot of things to balance and what's important to our community. And I think when it comes to, number one, identifying what is the type of behavior that rises to the level of being incapacitated or we're looking just for punishment, and then what is the balance out of, how do we balance that out with what we're going to benefit from that? Are we getting something out of that based on, preparing? I read the article that we talked about that is the foundation of this, and this is what they talked about, is balancing out that benefit. And that's going to help me in my future discussions with when someone's evaluating a penalty, what are we looking to benefit from it? And that's what I would want to have for that conversation. And what's going to be difficult is how we go back and address who's sitting in our prisons right now because of sentences that were passed down before. Because the attitude before was either purely retribution or incapacitation. And so then how do we change that? That is my concern too. Even if we start the conversation now with, let's balance out our benefit. What are our benefits that we're looking to get from criminalizing behavior? And I think we keep having this conversation about looking at treatment. looking at if we're concerned about behavior, it might not just be the behavior that we've deemed criminally or dangerous. We could be talking about something else. We could be talking about mental health needs. We could be talking about substance use needs. And so it still isn't going to be the behavior itself. It's what led to that and what else do we have going on. And so I think it's going to be what do we want in our community and how do we build an infrastructure that's going to get us to a place where everyone has the opportunity to take care of their needs and then really make choices that come from a place of, if they've made a choice and then there needs to be a punishment, then we can balance out, well, how do we want to punish them and then what benefit are we getting from that? But the problem is where we decide what is it we want to focus on. And so it can't just be one thing. It can't just be we're worried about this behavior. It has to be what do we want at the outset, because what's important to think about is then when they come back. When they come back to our community, that's the part we don't talk about either, is we criminalize the behavior and we say, we need to put you in a timeout. We need to punish this behavior. And then how do we bring them back? Because that's the part that's missing. I think actually deciding what we want to do, what the penalty we want to be, that might be the easy part. The hard part is now what do we do with them? When they come back, they have to feel like they're still part of the community. They have to have a job. They have to have a place to live. They have to have a family, whatever that may mean for them. And that's the part we have to think about after we decide, this is what a punishment, this is what the punishment deserves. That's fine. But then what happens? How do we welcome you back into the community?
Now, according to the final report by the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice, longer prison terms have been a major contributor to the expanded prison population. The amount of time individuals spend incarcerated has increased 20% since 2008, and recidivism rates have increased for nearly all offense types. So, Ms. Gonzalez, another question for you. What kind of recommendations and policies has your department pushed forward?
So one of the things we've looked very closely at is, again, the data-driven. Whatever is evaluated must be data-driven. And that also includes a fiscal analysis. So one of the things we did last session was wherever there were recommended changes to the prison population itself, we looked to put together data that would analyze as much of the system as we could. It wasn't just about how much of the population would be impacted by this reform, but then how many of these individuals were going to be moved to supervision. Because it's not just about when they leave the institution, it's what happens to them after that if they're still on supervision. That is still, in my opinion, incarcerating them away if we're not going to set them up for success. And so you have to think about that whole process. And so we want to look at what is that actually costing. Just because maybe we're down a few beds at DOC because you move someone to P&P, now you've just moved needs over here. Are they getting the programming they need? What kind of support are they getting? So we've looked at really making sure that anytime we're talking about any of these policy changes, make sure we're talking about what's the data that supports it, what's the fiscal analysis, and have we taken the whole criminal justice system into the assessment. And so when I talk to every single person that might be involved in this reform. One of the things that came up from AB 236 was what had been mentioned at the top of this discussion were the technical violations for those on supervision, as I'm talking about supervision. One of the things we're looking at right now is how are those best addressed. Specifically with parolees, there are challenges where if they have had enough technical violations, they actually have to go back and sit in a DOC facility while they await the outcome of that technical violation. So we have been collecting data and we're working on recommendations to present to the Sentencing Commission at our May meeting for how can we reduce those individuals coming back to prison just waiting to find out the outcome of those technical violations, and how can there maybe be a different sanction in place to address those that would help address the behavior itself and give them opportunities, rather than disrupting their lives that may cause them to lose their job and then have this ripple effect that may lead to recidivism. And then the other thing we're trying to do is making sure that we understand how sentence credits work. One of the things that when it comes to reform is how, when we're looking to make these changes, what are the mechanisms and the levers that we use to release individuals? And one of the challenges is our sentence credit system. And what we're looking to is explaining how that works so those sitting in a prison can understand what is going on with my sentence. I would like to understand how this works. We've got something we're putting together and we've collaborated, and we're actually going to be working to distribute it throughout the facility and to the inmates so they can understand to their families. and be this resource to understand. And once we are all on the same page with how sentence credits work, then we can all come up with ideas. Now, how do we reform the system? Because there have been many attempts to release individuals and decarcerate through our credit system. And what I'm recommending is we get away from that and we go to really, what are we looking to do to give these people opportunity and get them out? And I don't think it's through credits. And so I think understanding how credits work will help with future reforms and getting ideas for how do you really get the outcome that you want. And so I'm looking to clarify those issues so that we can move forward and then develop reforms that, again, get the outcome that everybody's looking for.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper, what are your thoughts? How do you hold people accountable while also addressing mass incarceration in the U.S.? There was a story in early February. A man killed 9 people in North Las Vegas after speeding through a stop sign. Is this different?
I do think in some ways it's different, right? And one of the things, the difficulties that we get into when we focus on, well, what about the person who cut 5 people up? Well, yeah, we're going to put that person in jail, right? And when you run through a stop sign and you kill 9 people, yes, we're going to put that person in jail. But we cannot get out of the crime problem and get public safety by incarceration. Most people are in jail not for killing 9 people or killing 1 person, right? Most of them are there for not petty offenses, and I would say usually it's nonviolent if you look beneath what the definitions of a nonviolent offense are, right? So those people, I think we have to think about, all right, we want some accountability in the sense that we want to restore the community, right? That we want to make sure that if somebody harms somebody, that that person who is the victim of the harm gets resources that they need, and that the person who caused the harm gets the resources that will allow them to not recidivate, right? And that doesn't mean that we have to send them to jail so that they don't go back to jail, right? I think instead what I would say is that in the extreme cases, there would have to be punishment of some form. But in most cases, I think we can be more thoughtful about the fact that we cannot create public safety through a punitive spirit.
Any other comments?
I would just add, I mean, when we're looking at the overall aggregate numbers, if 39% of those that are incarcerated here are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes, that's 39% we should be looking at right now that should probably not be in the system, especially when we're at capacity shortages consistently. It's why whenever there's issues with credit, we just mentioned the concept of credit, and during COVID that became an issue, right? What's happening when folks aren't being entitled to credit for any work that they performed, and there's communication that might come out from a particular site that says you're not getting credit, and then you hear a few days later clarification from the top end of the system which says you will be getting credit. It becomes confusing for folks. But even the notion of credit, right? When we're thinking about credit towards time served because you did something, if you think that I did prison labor for a month, so I should have a month knocked off, that means we're any safer, that's a flawed analysis in and of itself. The entire notion probably suggests at that point that the person should not be incarcerated. And if we're looking at something like substance abuse, right? Destroying the system as a whole. And I think most folks who are working in direct service providers, whether that's within the Nevada Department of Corrections, within the Clark County Detention Center, or anywhere else, would probably agree with this. These are not locations where these services should be housed up front. When we're dealing with something like mental illness, substance abuse issues, we should be treating the root causes of those outside of carceral systems. When we're forcing people to receive treatment, it's ineffective. It doesn't work in the same manner. We're looking at society effectively through a very narrow lens that's not actually focused on reform. We're focused on reform after they've already entered into the system. That's late. The investment needs to come before that. If we're looking at drug possession, if we're, again, these are in many instances, if we're looking at drug sale, And I hate to bring marijuana up as the reference consistently, even though it is 420, so I have no issue bringing that up. If we're looking at that, a couple decades later, when we're in a scenario where we're looking at the profits it can bring in, where was that moral change? How did we so easily change where, 25 years ago, this was the gateway into serious violent crime? Just a couple decades later, when folks can make a buck off it, now it's not, right? And from our vantage point, most of these shouldn't be criminalized. When we're talking about criminalizing every single element, it's no wonder we have an over-incarceration issue as well. And if we're scrambling for resources, take those folks off the books, send them home. The Nevada Department of Corrections and no other facility that's state-run should be in the business of mandating when someone's freedom comes as a means to rehabilitate them. That's not how freedom works, and that's not how rehabilitation or restoration works. Government solution and protectionism along those lines is not effective for anyone. One of the last points I'll bring up here, in certain other communities, the district attorney's office, when they're charging a crime and they're seeking a sentence of imprisonment, is required to share what that would cost the taxpayers. You don't know what's going to cost you to incarcerate someone. So anytime they're seeking a 25-year prison sentence for Joe Schmo that did X, Y, and Z, you have no idea as a taxpayer what it's going to cost you. And it's going to cost you a lot of money. That should be made publicly available beforehand. So maybe jurors would have or judge would have an informed decision they could make and decide, is this worth it? Are we keeping people in Ziploc storage bins, or are we actually getting them the help they need? And what would be the offset if we were to treat them in an outpatient capacity versus sending them into a system that's carceral, that forces them to be there, where we end up spending anywhere between, on average, $25,000 to $50,000 plus if it's in a regular unit, and more if it's not. I mean, I don't know anybody that wants $50,000 to come out of their pocket each year to go and fund someone that might have been in possession of an eighth of any of the controlled substances that are on the list right now.
So this is a topic that Mr. Daniels has spoken in length about at the museum, and I know has been a top priority for you, and two words that has been brought up in this discussion so far, but mental illness and the correctional system. So nearly 30% of the state's inmate population require treatment or medication for a mental health need. So Mr. Daniels, what types of policies have you enacted since taking office to address critical behavioral health challenges, and what kind of additional support is needed too?
Thank you for your question. As a matter of fact, we've done quite a bit. There's a focus on intake, identifying whether or not we have a person that may be mentally ill, and then what type of mental illness there is. So if the individual has trouble with impulse control or antisocial behavior, we separate them from the others, as opposed to putting some of the more meek and mild. We don't put them in the same place anymore. We talk to them, we try to assess them, then we try to work with them, and we bring in, through either telemedicine and or our staff, we work with their mental health issues. In the old days, as long as they weren't being victims of predators or they were the predators, we would try to mainline them out into general population. We don't do that anymore. We maintain step-down units that try to allow the inmates that are fairly similar in their behavior and their mental illness to live together, coexist together with the appropriate professionals there and an appropriate treatment plan with effective follow-up. We take great pride in not putting an individual in an environment in which we know the predators will obviously feast off of them. I remember when I started in corrections, that wasn't the case. Basically, if something's wrong with you, can you fight? I mean, that type of mentality is ridiculous, right? But now we've gone the extra mile. And when in doubt, we'll keep a person in a unit and try to then move him down in what we would call our step-down process and allow these individuals to try to work their way down. And if they can't make it, we'll send them to a more secure area where they're not around the more mainline or aggressive inmates. And for those that are actually able to receive the appropriate treatment, and it's deemed that they're appropriate to enter general population and they desire to, we do that also. But we always maintain organizational approach to keeping an eye on those folks and do the best that we can. So it's important. It's not what one would typically see on television. We're clearly given a bad light on television on that. My mental health staff are talented, and they're good, and they're committed. They're overworked, but you know what? They don't take time off. They come on in. I'm very proud of them as well as their leadership.
Thank you. Before we open this discussion up to the audience, I just want to kind of talk about some solutions, and I'd like to hear from all of you on this question. So Nevada spent more than $347 million on corrections in the fiscal year 2019, and a proposal that has been highlighted, especially in recent years, and I think what some members of the panel have highlighted during this discussion is possibly investing in social services like healthcare and affordable housing and employment opportunities instead of jails and prisons. And so I'd like for all of you to chime in on that question and any other solutions that you may be aware of.
Well, I would definitely say that we should move, well, it doesn't matter where it comes from, right? It doesn't matter whose budget it comes from, but that we need to spend money on social services so that education, housing, and jobs are possible for people, because there may be a small sliver of people who are likely to commit offenses under the best circumstances. But we have so many people under terrible circumstances that what we could do is have those people in a circumstance where they felt like my education meant something and I didn't just get treated as somebody who's about to go to jail anyways, where I have housing that makes me feel safe and secure, and where I have the possibility of getting a job, you know, whether I get a PhD or a vocational degree, right? And if those things are possible, then I think we would see that is actually how we deal with the root causes of crime and make ourselves more safe. So that's the first thing that I would say is yes, we should spend more on social services. Second thing I would say is there's an issue that we haven't really talked about that's really important here, which is the second-class status of some communities based on how law enforcement and prosecution are done here and everywhere. We are far from the worst, but when it is known that in certain communities you will be picked up for jaywalking and in other communities you will not be picked up for jaywalking, that doesn't just mean, oh, okay, I've got a 2.3% better chance of being able to jaywalk or go 4 miles over the speed limit. It means I'm thinking of the state thinks I'm 2.3% better or worse than other people. And so I think we really need to address racial profiling as well, so that people feel like everybody is truly treated equally, substantively equally, not just some sort of formal sense that, well, if you did something wrong, if you hadn't done something wrong, you wouldn't have been picked up. Well, lots of people do things wrong, and we call that their teenage years or their college years, right? But that's not happening in certain communities, and I think it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo all those. I'm also probably about to be the most unpopular person on the room with no career in politics ever, which I don't care about and don't want anyways. When we talk about we need to put investment somewhere, where's the investment money coming from? We have one of the most finite tax bases in the country. Almost everything that we have here for social services ends up predicated on sales tax. We have property tax caps that remain extremely low, that are incapable of funding programs. Our sales tax is meant to subsidize everything else. We have a room tax that comes through, and we look at the remainder of what's available in other communities, and it is so far wider than what we have in Nevada, it's almost impossible to not sort of think about it in laughable terms because of how far behind we are. We talk about schools a lot, right? And I come from as an educational policy advocate and advocate for quality education. Let's look at our schools. How much do we spend per pupil on schools and students here versus what they're spending in states that are ranked at the top of the educational spectrum, right? We're looking at some of the schools in the Northeast where they're spending $25,000 per student. We spend less than $10,000 or around $10,000 per student. We spend more, sometimes between 2 and 5 times more housing a person in the Nevada Department of Corrections than we will on a student. And we wonder 20 years later, why are we in this position? What investment have we put into housing? We look right now into the fact that folks are making $10 an hour, $12 an hour, $15 an hour. Now their rent's doubled. Where are they supposed to go? When you're spending 50% of your check on meeting one expense for your household, it doesn't provide a very strong future. And I'm not saying that that's a matter of the system inherently and everybody within the system being predatory that's at the top. No, right? But when we look at what our tax base looks like, it is weak. It is not strong. And we can't have legitimate, genuine conversations about fixing things by virtue of just saying we're going to outsource things. You know, it's funny. There's always conversations, and I'm an advocate for public charters as well. And when we talk about, well, that'll just fix everything because it's not managed by a big government. It actually won't. You're still putting the same investment in. And so when you have this meager investment into what's supposed to be the future, what are you expecting to get back in return? We look at healthcare. I don't think it would surprise anybody to say that we probably don't have the best healthcare system in the world, but we can't keep ranking at the top of every negative list and ranking first in every bad list, not properly discuss how we're going to actually fund things in a sustainable way for more than a 6-month period of time because the feds cut us some federal relief money for a period, and then feign shock and awe when things are when we're continuing to rank at the bottom of most quality of life indicators. In order to correct some of those, sure, maybe that 39% that I'm suggesting that are nonviolent, you could release them, cut down on what the NDOC expenditure is, but you will never, ever get to whole or quality, at least in that top 10, top 20, top 30% of quality of life indicators we have until we widen that base of what we're able to spend out in most of these programs. And we're able to look and say, hey, these students that we're talking about right now, yeah, it's going to be a few bucks more out of my check. If I'm a billionaire right now, it might be a few $1 million. I'm not maybe going to feel the impact, but 20 years from now, this community is going to remain vibrant instead of ebbing and flowing through the world of shutdowns when we end up having an economic bubble that ends up bursting, which is pretty much the case here every 12 to 13 years, it seems like, at least in recent memory. And then we all act confused afterwards, talk about diversifying industry, bringing in more tax revenue, and nobody's coming here because the schools and the social services we offer continue to rank near the bottom.
You stole my joke about being the most unpopular. I can't wait. I can't wait to see about who's the most unpopular because, first of all, I'm going to echo what you just said. I've had that conversation differently as well, but I absolutely agree as far as what our base needs to be to fund things. However, this is what's going to make me unpopular, is I think focusing on the number of what we're spending on corrections is the wrong conversation because it's necessary. Just like education, just like healthcare, just like anything else we have, crime isn't going away. But I think the way you spend it is what matters. And what I think, and I think to echo like so many things with great things we've heard tonight, I agree the system itself isn't broken. If what we set up and what we put in place, it does what it's supposed to do. If we create our laws in a way that we take care, we're dealing with the issues that are important to us, then I think if you ended up with someone who had killed the 5 people and that bill of $20,000, $50,000, you wouldn't balk at that because you're like, yes, that is getting us if that's what it costs to make sure this person gets this consequence, I'm okay with that. And so I think the context is what's important. It's not the dollar amount. And what's interesting is Nevada is not extreme on one end or the other as far as what we're spending for corrections. There are states spending a lot more on fewer inmates, and there are states spending a lot less on more inmates. And so it's not about that. It's about, are we getting what we want for our money? And I think that means funding all of this stuff. It actually might mean increasing funding because then you're also going to increase funding for other agencies, for other programs. And then what's going to happen as our population shift, then you get to reallocate resources to those things that are going to get you the outcome that you want, that are going to get you proper facilities, because there are those people we're just going to have to lock up and just say, this is your life now because of decisions they made. And I think ignoring that reality is not helpful for what our goals are. And so we're working to how can we talk about the money differently to really get you the outcome that's best for our community and for our state. And then just increase that base so we can do all the things.
You're right, definitely more unpopular than me.
I would say in terms of cost, I think we have to be cost effective. And what that means is that if the Department of Corrections is funded a certain amount of money. I'm looking at the allocation within the organization. How much of this actually goes towards education? I mean meaningful education. How much goes towards job training, bringing in simulators? How much of it goes towards our programming, vocational training, bringing in businesses to teach, bringing in truck driving schools, diesel engine repair? What are we doing that will change the trajectory of what once was the guaranteed path for a person that was formerly incarcerated? You get out, you'll struggle to find a job. You're almost always guaranteed that even if you find one, you'll be underemployed. You'll be tossed back into the circumstances from which you came, and then you will find yourself back on the cycle. I say we need to interdict now, and there's some notions that some folks have. Well, you shouldn't give them this, you shouldn't give them that. That's nonsensical. We need to ensure that we are giving an effort. So for instance, one of the things we're eliminating are courses and businesses wanting to do business that don't really provide a path forward for the individuals upon release. You're not going to come in here, get our guys to work for nothing, then offer them a minimum wage job. That's not workable because you are literally guaranteed the cycle continues. We have to be bold and we make statements, and we disappoint quite a few people that if you're here to leech off prison employment, you found the wrong place. But if you're here to actually help us change society, we're going to welcome you. But there will be something attached to every business endeavor. There will be licensure. There will be a certification, an industry certification. There'll be something that you can take, whether it's an associate degree, that you can go back out and say, I earned this and I deserve an opportunity. If I fall short, that's on me. And if we could just keep that in mind when people are returning back to the community, yes, they've committed a crime, but guess what? They paid. It's paid. Allow them back in. In many respects, they will be your best workers. Why? Because you're the first person to give them a real opportunity. So I say a lot of this is between the ears. We can sit back and talk about tough on crime. No one's arguing whether or not violent humans should be in prison. Thing is, those guys that are there for other reasons, and depending on what community they're from, they wouldn't have been even arrested in some areas. Having lived in New York City, having lived in Los Angeles, being from Chicago, kids, bunch of guys goofing around shooting basketball in the suburbs are just kids goofing around on the basketball court. Kids in the inner city shooting basketball are gangbangers waiting to plot their next hit. Those people, when they make contact, what do the police in some respects do? They label them gang members. Well, no, this guy has a jury rig thing he got when he was 9. His big brother had one, and some of the neighborhood guys at school had it. But from then on, this guy's a such and such. Then when he tries to go in and join the military, no, he's an active such and such. When he comes to us, well, he's a gang member. We can't put him at this place where he can program. Let's take him up north, put him behind some serious bars. All because of labeling that was perpetuated when that person was a very young person, just wanting to be just like the kids in the suburbs, like the big brothers and the big guys on the football team. But now we became a part of that, and that has even pushed its way into the system on hiring. Why are we washing these guys out? This person applied, it seemed like a good candidate, they're a gang member. What makes you think they're a gang member? Got a gang tattoo. Really? What is that? Well, it's clearly a gang tattoo. Really? What gang? When did he get it? Is he active? What has he done? Well, we just can't take any chances. Wrong. These are humans. And when we're young, many of us do things like put things on our bodies, markings on our body. But we have to get beyond those types of issues and see people for where they are and where they're going and help them reach their aspirations, even if they show up without it. And I think all of that piece is important.
Thank you. We have just a few minutes to answer any questions from the audience, maybe one or two. Our Jeff Schumacher has a handheld mic, and he can bring it to you if you raise your hand. We just kindly ask that you ask questions for our panelists and refrain from statements. And I think there's a person right over here.
Hi, everyone. Good night. My name is Carmen Solano. I'm an undergraduate researcher at UNLV studying criminal justice. My question is for all of the panelists, but particularly for the director here. And it's about Marsy's Law. Since 2018, when it passed on the ballot, we have yet to figure out what its impact has been, both judicially and fiscally. So my question to you is going to be about both prongs. But the first one, fiscally, has the implementation of Marcy's Law reduced state budgets from a correctional perspective for victim services funds?
I'm not qualified to give you a breakdown as to whether or not the funding reduced state budget. I'm not in that piece, but I can tell you what, one of the bigger issues you have with Marcy's Law is interpretation in terms of how you prioritize the money that's to go back to victims and restitution and so on. That has not been settled. It seems that it never stops coming back around when you have advocacy groups saying, little Johnny needs to prepare for release, but if he has to spend all of his money on child care or victims, then he won't have enough. And then think about it. This went through 2 legislatures and was voted on by the people. But if you were to look at the current interpretation, it is not reflective of what the people meant and what they spoke for.
Thank you, Director. That was very helpful. For the lawyers on the panel, what has been the judicial impact?
I'm not sure about the specific judicial impact of it. I think, as the director says, that it's still subject to interpretation, which means we don't know yet. But you're in the best place in the state to find out more about that in the Criminal Justice Department, because they will have more of the concrete rules on that. So look for that. Good.
There's another question over here.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm probably going to go against what you just asked. Forgive me, I've been known for that. There's a couple gentlemen here that will probably attest. As a formerly incarcerated person that spent nearly 30 years in prison, recently released, I have a notepad full of notes that I would love to share with each and every one of you whenever you might have or permit time, directly addressing some of the issues that were spoken about tonight that I could personally attest to. So in the event, I realize this is not the venue now.
Yep.
I'd like to make myself available to speak to each and every one of you. My name is Michael DiVicino. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Michael. Any other questions? Jeff, this is your workout for tonight.
I needed it.
Hi, this question is for Director Daniels. I appreciate hearing the words that you are dedicated to helping the trajectory of people from the moment they come in for re-entry into the community. However, it seems over the last couple of years since you took over in the administration, there have been quite a few independent reports and analysis of significant problems in your Department of Corrections that have very negative impact on individuals as they try to go through to reentry. So the voices of those who are incarcerated, the humanization, or rather the dehumanization of those who are incarcerated, even something as simple as referring them always as offenders as opposed to people who are incarcerated. The COVID rate, despite your saying that it was stellar, was the 3rd highest in the country. 155 people have died while incarcerated in the Nevada Department of Corrections, which means that instead of whatever term of years a judge gave them, they all got a death sentence. The denial of medication, the problems with solitary confinement, the fact that they have to pay for copay for medical care, the fact that much medical care is denied to them. There have been a litany of lawsuits to get more access to that. So the question is, does not the buck stop with you to create an environment where access to appropriate health care, appropriate mental health care, et cetera? You have 11,000 plus people that are in the system, a little bit fewer than that are in the physical facilities. But don't you have an obligation to kind of walk the walk of your talk and to do what you can to make the fact that so many people, a percentage that's in the high 70s, come out of Nevada Department of Corrections suffering PTSD from the traumas that they had, the fear every day, the fear of attack from other inmates, and the point that Attar made, which was that the complaints of those individuals, 2/3 of them were never even investigated, and the rest were found to mostly be unfounded. So a person who's in that situation, where do they have to turn for hope when their experience is so negative?
Well, thank you for your question. I appreciate the fact that your questions and statements were heartfelt, but let me now provide you with some facts. First of all, we were not in the bottom third in the nation. It was reported in a report that we had the third highest rate of death. That was an inaccurate report. We looked at the source. The source was the people that put it together who quoted the source from another group that did no research. The reality of it is the rate that they said we had was, I believe, was 4.6 per 10,000. Our actual number is 0.06 per 10,000. So if we want to address issues, I have no problem. And I will tell you unequivocally, I'm the end of the road when it comes to it in the prison system. Some of the things that you stated are just facts that are repeated and repeated over and over. But if you were to look at the basis on where that data comes from, you will find out these are from publications whose only desire is to release as many incarcerated people as possible. That's neither here nor there. But I will tell you this, here's what we're doing. We have exponentially increased the amount of individuals that we have working in our health department. Our medical director and our chiefs of nursing and medical directors are outstanding. They're dedicated. They work hard and they're often, and they work in a field that's competitive in which they can make much, much more on the outside. Most of them stay because they feel they have a commitment. I would reject the fact that we are not doing a good job. Is it perfect? No. But what one person may consider to be adequate medical care, in some respects, is just care they believe they should get if they had to be out in the community. The question is our resources and what is medically necessary as opposed to what is nice to have. I can't argue each case. I'm sure that on occasion we may drop the ball. Nonetheless, we are committed. We take it serious. In terms of violence and in terms of investigating crimes or whatever it be inside of a penal institution. My Inspector General is here tonight. We spend a lot of time and effort dealing, plotting, identifying where we have our issues, who's causing it, how we can separate them and move them around to keep the rest of the population safe. Is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. But our investigators at our institutions, our wardens at our institution, of which I have two sitting here in the audience, and feel free to chat with them after, they will tell you they go above and beyond to keep folks safe. Many of our inmates complain that we go too far to keep them safe because they're tough guys. Nonetheless, we have a statutory requirement and an Eighth Amendment requirement of the U.S. Constitution to run safe and humane, safe conditions and humane treatment in our facilities. And I will be here to tell you, I think we do a pretty good job. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. If I had more human staff, we'd do a better job. But you know what? When you look at what we have available, you look at the resources we have, human, otherwise, and you look at the technology that we do and or don't have, we do a pretty good job. And the one thing I want you to go away with, I can't take away from you. I can't take your fear away. I appreciate the fact that you're concerned. But if anything is brought to my attention, it will be reported. I typically will be dealing with my Inspector General literally within the first 30 minutes of me receiving any information. And he gets the copy and he sends that on to the warden. That's our standard operating procedure. So I get it. Folks are frustrated. When you're removed from society and your liberty is taken, that's automatically going to put you in a frame of mind that I'm not the happiest person. Nonetheless, if you work with us, I will give you this. As the leader of this organization, we will do everything that we can possibly do within the scope of our resources to prepare you for your eventual release back into society. I can walk away from here, you can talk to my staff, and they will repeat that because that is our mantra, and that's what we do. I would like to make it better, but I don't have the unlimited resources to do so. But what we can do, we do well. If we do make a mistake, we identify it, we see if it's just a mistake or if it's structural, we try to fix it. And we're going to continuously evolve as technology and techniques come about and treatment. But we're not sitting back, and I would hope that you understand keeping humans in a place that they don't want to be 24/7 for multiple years is challenging in some respects. Nonetheless, we'll never quit on trying to provide a better opportunity for those individuals to be prepared when they release. Why? Because I'm also a citizen of this state and this nation, and I want a better society. And I'm actually in a position to make change. So I'm engaged in that change. I appreciate any recommendations you may have. So thank you for being here with us tonight.
Okay, so we have run out of time. I do want to say a special thank you to each of our panelists for their insight during tonight's program. Our second Breaking the Cycle of Incarceration series, that will be held on May 25th from 7 to 8:30 right here in the courtroom, and that's called The Root Causes of Crime, Exploring the Community First Approach to Crime and Punishment. And in that discussion, we will be exploring the root causes of crime and various ways to keep people from going to prison in the first place, and we certainly hope to see you all there. So thank you for coming, and again, please give all of our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.